This is the only way to bet parlays in the NFL and actually win. So let's go ahead and talk about parlays. Now, most of you know that I preach parlays are always a losing bet. Okay? That's because most people that want a parlay are going to take 4 or 5 teams, they're going to mash it together and they're going to try to win, or they're going to take 4 or 5 totals, mash together, or they're going to mix all that together in 4 or 5 teams and try to win. That is how you successfully lose money long term with parlays. Now, what I'm about to show you is the only way that you could actually be successful with doing any type of parlay in the NFL. Trust me, because I have this backtracked and I have did this for a long period of time. So I know exactly what you need to look at to be successful with it. Now, it does involve player props. So you're not going to be looking at the money lines, you're not going to be looking at the totals, all right? You're going to be looking at player props. Now, if you watched any of my other videos, you would see that I focus a lot on the QB player prop. So, QB alternate passing yards. That's the first thing you're going to be looking at, okay? The alternate passing yards. Now, when you find a line that has a QB, we're just going to use a couple examples here. All right, let's pull up Burrow because it's always, we know he likes to throw the ball. All right, so we'll pull up Burrow as an example. Let's say for him to get 250 plus passing yards is the alternate line, okay? Let's say that line is, let's say it's at minus 500. Just for example, I'm not pulling this isn't with the real lines, I'm just using that as an example, okay? If he has a good matchup and he has everything lining up for him to be able to surpass this, let's say his probability is 92%, all right? If he's 92%, now what you want to do to be able to have a successful chance at winning a parlay long term is, in the NFL, you want to pair him with a receiver. Because obviously, if we have him over passing yards and we think he's going to have a decent amount of passing yards, well, you pair him with his receiver. So his number one receiver would be Jamar Chase, obviously. Okay? And let's say Jamar Chase, 50 plus receiving. Again, this is alternate. Everything that you're looking at here is alternate lines. Let's say his 50 plus receiving is minus 300. Okay? Well, let's say the probability on that is 88%. So now with pairing both of those together, what you're going to get is you're going to get a bet that is minus 165. It has an implied probability of 62%. Okay? But the actual probability now, with a 92% and 88%, you match those together, you get an actual percentage of 80% that parlay is actually going to hit, which is giving you an 18%. Okay? So once again, player props, QB, you're matching your QB with your receiver that you're using for passing yards, and the reason behind that is because, obviously, if the QB is going to have a decent amount of passing yards, he's got to pass to somebody. So obviously his number one receiver most likely is going to be the one catching a lot of that. So you pair them up at a high price, but with a high probability, okay? Got to have a high probability with it, because that's the only way that it makes sense. If these were both 60% probabilities, this would be a negative edge. But with a high probability percentage, now you mash those together, now you're getting a two-teamer that's minus 165, at 62% implied probability, okay? But the true probability is 80%, giving you an 18% edge. You find those week in and week out, and you will be successful long-term with a two-teamer player prop parlay. Now let me show you guys also a visual of what this looks like. So, for example, just like what we used writing down, let's say a minus 500 play and a minus 300 play. As you can see right here, there's a 62% implied probability there, okay? So 62.5% implied probability, which means, like I said, our true probability is 80% on the example that we're using. So that gives us an 18% edge. Now this is inside our bet tracker, okay? All these tools in here. So you could actually see exactly what it is that you need to be able to get that implied probability versus that true probability. Because look, you could take the implied probability here at 62%, and literally it could tell you here what that's going to be. Like minus 165 is going to be 62%. Okay, it shows you what the odds are pretty much going to be. So you could use that as the parlay calculator that kind of dictates that and shows you how to do that. Because this is the only way that you're going to know exactly the amount that you're going to have and the edge that you're going to have. Because if you don't know what your edge is, that's why so many people lose parlays. They don't really get that there's a certain probability percentage that goes into putting parlays together. So when you're putting more than 2 or 3 teams, you're doing 3, 4, 5 legs, that probability percentage goes way, way, way down. And then they wonder why they lose. That's why you end up losing. When you're putting 2 player props together with high probability percentages, you're going to get an odd that's still a little bit high. But like I said, when you have that true probability versus the implied probability and it's like this, then you have your edge because that's what's in the middle. Most parlay bettors are this way, where their true probability percentage is down here and their implied probability percentage is like right here. Okay, it's flip-flopped most of the time. That's why most parlay bettors end up losing. That's why parlays are sucker bets, because anything over two teams, you're just putting your probability percentage drastically way down. So what ends up happening is, yeah, maybe it's fun because you see a multiplier on there that you could put $20 down, win $400 or $500, but it's never really truly going to happen. And when it does, you're going to be stuck doing that because literally out of 100 times of doing that, you might only win one time because of the probability percentage that you have. Because probability is going to be probability. Math is going to be math. It's always just going to come out the same exact way. So if you have a 1% chance of hitting a 5-teamer, well, out of 100 times of you doing that, $20 a piece, let's say, you only win one time. That's not going to cover all of your losses. And then, like I said, long term, you are losing. Now, if you want to fast forward through all this and learn exactly the right strategies in the NFL that actually work, and not just the NFL, but every single major sport out there, make sure you go and click the link in the description. Now, the only reason that this actually works is because of the high probability percentage that you have on both ends. If you don't have the high probability percentage on both ends, you're not going to get a percentage that's better than the true probability percentage. You're just not, okay? And that's where a lot of people that bet parlays, that's where they screw up at. Now, if you add another leg to this, if you do 3 legs now your percentage is really going to drop. And it's almost impossible to have a plus edge with 3 player props. So that's why you have to stick to 2. Now, I'm going to write that here so that way you guys see. 2-teamer, okay? You have to. Got to stick to that. If you add any more, your overall percentage drops drastically. And then you cannot get a true probability percentage that's higher than the implied probability. And you're not going to be able to get an edge. So as long as you stick to this recipe right here, this is the only way parlays will actually work for you long term. Every other way, if you're trying to bet money lines, you're trying to bet totals, you're trying to bet spreads, you will lose long term because those probability percentages, like I said, it comes down to numbers and it comes down to math. Those probability percentages are going to be lower than a true probability percentage. And you're going to be betting a negative edge play constantly over and over, which is what most people do when they're betting parlays. That is exactly the reason why they constantly lose, or they'll lose by 1 leg, or they'll lose by 2 legs, is because the probability percentage is so low for them to be able to hit that. As long as you're staying in a high probability area, you have a high chance of winning. That's where math comes into play. As long as you are in that bracket of 80% and above, guess what? It doesn't matter if it's 1 team or if it's 2 teams with a player prop, you still have that same probability percentage. It's that still you're going to be able to have that probability to be able to hit that, okay? That is where most people lose. They don't understand the true probability versus the implied probability and finding that edge, because the edge is the biggest part and the most important part. So if you can't find an edge, guess what? Long term, you're going to lose money and you're going to keep donating money and you're going to keep trying over and over again. Yes, maybe you'll hit one time, but the thing is, once you win, you'll keep trying to win at that same pace again, and then you'll donate and you'll end up losing long term. So this is the only way that you can win betting parlays in the NFL.